Welcome, everyone. Welcome along to the Fantasy Insider podcast for this Friday, the 16th of February. Great big show for you today. We're talking AFLW, and we're doing it with the best in the business. Kiwi in Oz coming off a first place in Saturday night's 5K contest over in Perth between the Dockers and the Pies. Took it down with the highest ever AFLW score so far this season, 618 points. Kiwi and Oz will be joining me in the studio in a few moments' time. In fact, I think I see his limo pulling up out the front now, so that's great news that he hasn't forgotten the little people. He and I will be deep diving into Saturday night's 5K contest between the Blues and the Lions. Should be a ripping contest. JK123, speaking of the best in the business, JK returns to talk Sunday's 5K contest. Both he and I will be running through our teams for the Fantasy Insider Listeners Cup. Something new, something a bit different, something that all listeners can be a part of this week, which is great news. But just before we begin today, not enough podcast hosts take the time to make this kind of an effort. So I hope that it will be well received, particularly by our Queensland listeners. And if you are in Queensland listening, enjoying this, perhaps in the car, maybe driving home from work, driving to a friend's house, if I could just get you to indicate to your left and get out of the overtaking lane, safely of course, so that the 12 or so cars backed up behind you for the last few kilometres that you probably haven't seen can get past and about their business.
That's what you're trying to say. You're trying to say, let's get down to business. It's business time. It's business. It's business time.
You know that feeling when you just enter three lineups in a $5,000 AFLW contest, and not only do all three cash, but one of them comes first and takes the whole thing down? No? Don't know that feeling? Well, the man sitting across from me right now, he knows that feeling. He knows that feeling quite well because he dominated last Saturday night's contest between the Dockers and the Collingwood Magpies, taking out the contest with a season-high 618-point score. The man is on fire in the world of AFLW fantasy, so listen in, get the pens and paper ready. A very warm welcome to you, Kiwi and Oz, and congratulations on the win on Saturday.
Oh, thanks for that intro, Hedge. Look, for the record, that limo was just a rental. But for sure, mate, I was stoked to get the win last weekend after all the work I've put into, learning the game and the players. We were actually locked in a pretty epic battle for first and second there towards the end of that game. It was heaps of fun. But, mate, I'll happily take first this time after you robbed me of victory in the first of the BBL tournaments.
I was wondering when that was going to come up. Kiwi, let's rip right in. It is business time. You've got the music playing in the background. Blues versus Lions at Ikon Park Saturday night. The game looks like an absolute cracker from a fantasy perspective. No Bree Davey, though, for the Blues. Just how big of a loss is that? And more importantly, which players do you see as being advantaged by her absence?
Yeah, Bree Davey is a massive loss for the Blues. She's by far their best player. And, we've seen what happens to what can happen to a team when they lose their best player. Despite what the bookies think, I really like the Lions in this game. It's a big redemption game for them after last weekend's disappointment. And they're up against the Blues side, missing their best player. I'll definitely have a line stack amongst my lineups this game. But more than likely, a balanced lineup will be optimal for, what should be a close game. For my balanced lineup, I really wanted to play Taylor Harris, up against her old team, but her shoulder injury really worries me. She went down hard at the end of last weekend's game. So at forward, I've gone for Darcy Vesio. She had 4 shots on goal last weekend and could easily have had a huge fantasy point score if it wasn't for the crosswind in that game. I'm hoping this will be her week for a big score. My Lions forward is Jess Wushner. She's kicked a couple of goals in each of the Lions games this season. But I just really love the way she plays. She's super strong and she just goes in hard all game long. I think Kelly Anderson is a lock despite her, huge jump in salary. She kind of went missing for a bit of the game last week, but still returned 74 fantasy points. I wouldn't be surprised to see her go for 100 in this game. My other Lions mid is Emily Bates. In this corresponding game last season, she had 22 disposals. She's the Lions' most consistent player and can certainly get near the ton as well. For the Blues, I'm playing Sophie Lee, who's been named as starting centre this week. I think she could really be one to benefit from the loss of Davey, plus she's min-priced. Also mid, I'm going to play Jess Hosking. She's been super solid off the Blues bench. And interestingly, the Fantasy Insider lineup cruncher projections have her as one of the best value plays in this game, along with Sophie Lee. I've rostered Sarah Hosking as my first defensive slot. She's super hard to fade after her 16 tackles last game. Also in defence, I've opted for Lion Talia Randall. She quietly racked up 23 hitouts last game, which is impressive. I really like that she's named at centre-half forward in this game, plus she's only 8K. At ruck, I'm going to lock in Shani Webb. She had double-digit disposals in both of her games this season, and she's just another one of those players who seems to play, all over the park with a high-level involvement, which, after all, is the first step to a good fantasy point score.
Yeah, very solid side, Kiwi. We have a few similarities, as always, but we do have some philosophical differences, it sounds like. Just before I get into my team, though, I was interested you mentioned the optimal lineup or the lineup cruncher on Fantasy Insider. Just for people listening that aren't sure or don't know what the lineup cruncher is, what we're talking about, can you explain it to them?
Yeah, sure. For those who aren't aware, Fantasy Insider uses a bunch of highly clever calculations to publish projections for each player. And then they use some equally highly clever calculations to put together optimal lineups that are going to result in the highest possible score. Cruncher can produce as many lineups as you like, but by default, it puts 10 out there, and you can kind of look through them, pick and choose the ones you like the look of.
Yes, I certainly like the look of that side, but I tell you what, Kiwi, I'm a little bullish about my team here. I think I'm going to beat you this game. This is my redemption game. My forward line is Wushner and Frederick Traub. I disagree on the Frederick Traub front with you. I expect both to be focal points, but more importantly, Frederick Traub, I think she'll get upwards of sort of 8, 9, 10 marks, which will really build a nice base for her. Hopefully she kicks a few goals as well. My midfield, I've gone 2 guns and 2 rookies, and I've gone 3, the same as you. I agree with Bates, have to play Anderson. My 2 rookies are both Blues players, and 2 players I expect to rise from in Davies' absence. Sophie Lee, I agree with you, she can clear 50 here. Still a rookie priced, but she's been playing mainly as a half-forward link role for the Blues, and I expect that the Blues will drop Stevens back to plug that hole that Davies left, which gives Lee plenty of midfield time. She played as an on-baller in the Sandful, was best on ground in the grand final as an on-baller. I think she clears 50 here quite easily. I think she's really good value. My big risk play is Madison Gay. Slightly above rookie price at 8k, but went missing last week in the wet in Sydney against the Giants. She's predominantly an attacking outside midfielder, but those 4 tackles on debut against the Pies, and just watching her in the last 2 weeks, I think she's ready to clear 50. I didn't want to pick Sarah Hoskins, but those 16 tackles just make it almost impossible to fade her. She also is the vice-captain of the club, and in Davies' absence, I think the onus will be on her to rip in, which she absolutely did. If you watched her game last week in the wet, I've found it impossible to fade her, despite the fact that she got 27 points in round 1. Lastly, Kate Lutkins. She's a bit of an enigma to me. Kiwi, you and I were talking about her a few days ago. 15 touches and 5 marks in game 1, up around the 60-point mark when Brisbane were dominant, and 8 tackles last week against the Dogs when they were on the back foot. Tells me that no matter what the game situation is, she's a player that can score. So, dependable player.
Yeah, nice, mate. There's a lot to like about that lineup. And look, most of the players you mentioned, I had in and out of my lineup at some point as I revised it 54 times this afternoon when final teams were announced.
Don't go just yet, Kiwi, because before the Blues game, there is a $3,000 contest on Saturday afternoon between the Adelaide Crows and the Melbourne Demons, which I'm sure will have plenty of interest. And we're going to go very quickly now, run over that game in our new segment, Don't Think, Do.
Please do something! Do! Don't think, don't hope, do!
Yeah, it's a very interesting game. The underperforming Crows have their best player from last season playing her first game of the year, and they're up against a Dogs side who are making serious claims on a final berth. Don't for me is Erin Marinoff. Like, she's had some good games this season and reasonable fantasy points, but I'm expecting her score to drop off dramatically in this game. I know you're going to talk about Erin Phillips, so I'll just mention that I expect she'll dominate and absolutely kill Marinoff's fantasy point scoring. My think recommendation is to consider playing double rucks in Metcalf and O'Connor. They've both demonstrated at least 6x ceilings and have reasonable hit-out stats, which means they see plenty of action. And choosing players who get involved in the play frequently is obviously a huge draw card. My do play is Jenna Bruton. Now, we both liked her last weekend, and she really delivered with 15 possessions and 76 fantasy points. Draftstars have unfortunately jacked up the salaries of quite a few players this weekend, but Bruton isn't one of them. For 8K, she's a bargain and an absolute must-play for me.
Yeah, I like that. My don't play is Sarah Perkins, averaging 15 points and needing to beat the best defence in the comp, especially Downey and Jacobson, who intercept better than almost anyone. Don't want anything to do with Perkins. My think is Mariana Rajcic. She's on debut for the Crows. Former soccer player who was a pivotal defender for the Norwood side this year in the Sandful. She was, interestingly for a defender, 5th in the comp for disposals and 4th for inside 50. So she knows how to find it, knows how to deliver it, and I expect her to play off half back. And this weekend, at that price, with so many guns in the side that you want to fit in, not that much risk in playing a rookie. So she goes in as a think for me. And my do, Mick, do something, Erin Phillips. For anyone thinking, yeah, but first up, the quad complaint, I don't know. Let me just help you a bit. Average 20 disposals, 4 tackles, 4 marks, and 1 goal 3, Kiwi, in a competition that very few people kick very many goals. She may actually be approaching pod status here, which is just frightening. Must have for mine.
Yeah, I think if you're not playing her, you're making a mistake. Look, I'm hoping that a heap of people see that 0 next to her name, no stats, and just skip on past her because she's going to kill this game.
The honeymoon certainly seems to be over for Tex Perkins and the Crows, but the show must go on here for us. My next guest, one of, if not the best in the DFS business here in Australia, and he returns to the podcast to talk us through his lineup in the first ever Fantasy Insider Listeners' Cup, which anyone can compete in. It's on the Draftstars lobby right now. A very warm welcome to JK123.
Yeah, hey, good to be here. After the absolute beating you gave me last week, it would be nice if some other people join our comp so that I don't have to go head-to-head with you. There's no shame in losing to a massive score, and I'll see what I can do this week.
So much value out there in round 3. Let us know. Let's run through your team.
So they've changed the prices a little bit, but there's still some pretty good value. At F1, I've got Kate Hoare, 9,700. She was one of your master strokes from last week. She's had a fair price rise, but still seems like solid value at a new price in a really nice matchup against the Dockers. At F2, I've got Tegan Cunningham for 8,550. I'm a little less confident about this one as she's a key forward and she's been kicking some goals, but I expect Melbourne to keep rolling along, so I've locked her in just as some salary relief. At M1, I've got Daisy Pearce for 18,700. Not that much that needs to be said here. Obviously, one of the top players in the comp and as consistent as they come. So she should be great this week. And yeah, I'm really just laying on the Melbourne stack here. At M2, I've got Chloe Malloy for 14,950. Could be a little bit of bias in this pick, maybe. She's my favorite player. But I love watching her play and can't see any reason that she won't keep pumping out 75s and 80s. Maybe with another price rise, I'd move on. But for now, I think she's still a solid play. At M3, this one might be a little bit controversial. I'm not sure. I've got Lisa Webb for 11,300. It's kind of funny, I guess, because she was minimum price last week, and now she's had a 5K price rise, which is the type of thing that normally sends Draftstars chatters up in arms. But she was just phenomenal on debut. She looked like she could run forever, and she outclassed most of the people around her in her first game. So I reckon she's still a pretty solid option for 11K. But I might be regretting that next week, given that she's got a tough matchup against the Ds. At M4, I've got some more blatant plagiarism with Courtney Gum for 91.50, who I've stolen from your team from last week. Pretty hard to argue with 16 possessions and 8 tackles for 9K. Then at the Defender 1 spot, I've got Melissa Hickey for 12,950. She's yet another Melbourne player. She's an elite tackler, which we love. She's averaging 7 tackles so far, which is amazing for a defender. She even pushed forward and kicked a goal last week. Then at D2, I've got Bonnie Toogood for 7,400, who's honestly worth picking just on name alone. But she's been really solid so far. She's averaging 48. She has a nice matchup against the Crows, who've been leaking a lot of points so far. And yeah, just really cheap there. And then in the ruck, I've paid down there as well for Erin Hoare again, 7,300. She only had 40 last week, but I think 7,300 is still just a bit too cheap. And while her hitouts went down from 22 to 10 last week, she sort of made up for a bit with 5 tackles. So she's showing that she's got a really solid floor with a couple of different ways of reliably scoring points.
4 similar players. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for me to reveal the players on the podcast, but I will be posting my team on the article that accompanies the podcast. Won't be changing it. Hopefully we get it fielded and we get a few more people participating.
Good practice, team. Steven, I like your hustle. That's why it was so hard to cut you. Congratulations. The rest of you made the team. Except you, and you.
Just before we finish up, for listeners who are interested, I've whipped up a little graphic through the week on winning scores and also lowest scores that have cashed in each of the main games on Draftstars in the first 2 rounds of the AFLW. Pretty interesting. The cash line's been pretty consistent at just over 450 points, roughly, for the $5,000 contests on Draftstars. Anyway, I found it interesting. Thought I'd share it. It's up there on the Fantasy Insider website, right underneath the link to this podcast that you're listening to right now. Do yourself a favour, make sure you go and check out Fantasy Insider. It really is the best DFS tool in the business. AFLW, there's not a lot of stats about, not a lot of info. Fantasy Insider have the info, they've got the player projections up there, the lineup cruncher. It's all there at www.fantasyinsider.com.au. Make sure that you join in on the Listeners' Cup action. That's on Draftstars, the link. Hopefully we've helped strengthen some of your lineups this weekend. Good luck at the footy.